Maggie's Regression. Maggie was frustrated. It had been a long day of boring lectures. Maggie felt that if somebody could make even the 1960s sound like a boring time, they really shouldn't be allowed to teach. Especially at the beginning of the semester. They'd pose a suicide risk for the students. She had told her boyfriend Christopher that over lunch. Well, he wasn't really her boyfriend, they were more like friends with benefits. He had made all the right, sympathetic noises, but she knew he'd been ogling one of the new psychology professors. Maggie had to snap her fingers in Christopher's face to wake him up. She had said that she didn't really blame him for looking. After all, it was impressive how she looked like she was in her early 30s while she had to be at least a decade older, but that hadn't been true. She had been feeling down and looking for some sympathy, not a not-quite boyfriend who couldn't keep his attention on her for 2 minutes. In hindsight, she regretted not just getting up and leaving right there and then. Instead, she had played the part of the loyal friend and stuck around until Christopher had had to leave for class. After that, Maggie had had to endure another couple of classes that thankfully weren't quite as bad as the history lecture, but they had still been annoyingly tedious. Add to that 4 hours of work, and by the time Maggie returned to her tiny apartment, she was just about ready to strangle someone. She really wasn't cut out for work in the retail sector, particularly during back-to-school sales. Even flying around Azeroth on her favorite World of Warcraft character failed to relax her. There was really only one thing to do: Maggie went to bed early. For Maggie, getting ready for bed when she was feeling like this was a little more elaborate than normally. She started by pulling out the bottom towel from the neatly folded stack in her tiny bathroom. It was the biggest and softest of them all, and she always made sure to put it at the bottom of the stack so she wouldn't grab it by mistake. Maggie moved the table out of the way, pulled out the sleeper sofa and quickly made the bed. Next, she spread the towel out on the bed and folded it several times. After stripping, she sat down on the towel and pulled it up between her legs. She slipped her feet into a pair of oversized granny panties and pulled them up so they held the towel in place. Maggie didn't need the diaper, but for some reason she liked the feeling of being padded. She always had. The thicker the better. If she couldn't bring her legs together, that was perfect. She had lost count of how often she had woken up with most of her duvet stuffed between her legs when she was younger. As she grew older, she had begun to do it intentionally before she fell asleep. At first just using a blanket or her duvet, but eventually she switched to towels. Maggie had never shared this with anyone, but whenever she was stressed or upset, the temptation was always there. And more often than not, she acted on it. Maggie could almost feel the tension leave her body as she lay on her bed, the evening sun peeking in around the edges of her curtains and the warm summer air making a slight sheen of sweat appear on her skin. She slipped a hand inside her diaper and lazily played with herself while she listened to the traffic outside. Eventually, she drifted off to sleep. Maggie awoke with a start and found she couldn't move. She was completely paralyzed as a cool draft raised goosebumps on her clammy skin. Some oddly calm corner of her mind worried how it would look if somebody saw her like this, wearing a big diaper and with one hand inside it. If Chris saw me like this, I'd never hear the end of it. Maggie's thoughts were interrupted by a metallic gurgling sound. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see the mirror next to the door. It looked less like a mirror and more like a vertical pool of mercury. Part of its surface was oozing down the wall to form a shiny puddle on the floor. Then something rose out of the puddle, human-shaped, but with a mirror finish. The annoyingly detached and nerdy part of Maggie's mind noted that it was just like the T-1000 Terminator. Its surface dulled and it turned around and it was her. It looked exactly like Maggie. It was wearing the same bulky diaper and granny panties. It even had the same tattoo of a fox barely visible over the waistband of the panties, except it was on the wrong hip. The mirror image walked over to the bed and sat down next to Maggie, who pretended to be asleep, peering out through almost closed eyes. It wasn't very hard since she couldn't really move anything else anyway. "Oh, stop that," the mirror image said. "I know you're awake." She reached out and brushed the hair out of Maggie's face. Maggie felt her muscles relaxing as the paralysis began to fade away. She tried to pull her hand out of her diaper, but the mirror image stopped her. Just leave it there for now. We both know you like that. How? Maggie whispered. Well, duh. I thought that'd be obvious by now. I know that your cell phone PIN number is your birthday backwards, divided by 3. I know you almost flunked history last term. The mirror image reached down to touch her own tattoo. I know who held your hand while you got this and how you still have a bottle of her shampoo in your bathroom. She stroked Maggie's cheek. I know everything about you because I am you. I meant, how is this poss? Hang on, I do not have a bottle of Seasons shampoo, Maggie protested. No, you're right. It's her conditioner. But that's not what's important, nor is how I'm here. What matters is why I'm here. And why is that? Maggie was slowly trying to slide away. You had a crap day. You were annoyed that summer is almost over and that you're back in school with all the drama that entails. You wanted some sympathy and maybe a good hug, but that dumbass Chris was too busy thinking about that hottie professor. Yeah, Maggie admitted reluctantly. So I'm here to make you a deal. The mirror image took Maggie's hand in hers and looked into her eyes. Do you remember when you were little? When summers lasted almost forever and you didn't have to worry about anything? Yeah. Wouldn't you like that again? The mirror image slowly stroked Maggie's hand. No stupid job or classes to go to, no responsibilities. Not a care in the world. Millimeter HM, Maggie said dreamily. I can make it that way again, the mirror image said and rose from the bed. Take my hand. In a daze, Maggie swung her legs out of bed and got up. She walked behind the other Maggie towards the mirror, holding her hand. The mirror was so narrow that her mirror image had to step through it sideways, vanishing through the slowly rippling surface. When she pulled Maggie along and her hand made contact with the mirror, she expected it to feel cold, but it didn't. It felt more like a warm, heavy mist or fog. Maggie closed her eyes as she stepped through, and when she opened them again she was still standing in her apartment, except it was different somehow. It took her a couple of moments to notice a magazine on the table, but then she realized that everything was mirrored. Come along now, said the mirror image. Or was Maggie the mirror image on this side of the mirror? Still holding the other Maggie's hand with one hand and holding up the sagging towel diaper with the other, Maggie followed other Maggie through the door. They emerged in the middle of a small clearing surrounded by trees. Looking back, Maggie saw a small shed. Other Maggie was saying something, but Maggie was still mesmerized by the surroundings. She bent down and picked one of the flowers next to her bare foot. It's incredible. This even smells real. Maggie breathed deeply, smelling grass and wildflowers. It is real, other Maggie said. Now come along. There's somebody I want you to meet. Like this. Maggie suddenly became aware of what she was wearing. Oh, nobody will mind. No worries, remember. Other Maggie took Maggie's hand and pulled her along into the forest. When they came out of the forest, they were at the top of a small hill. Below them was a large house, a pond and a large garden with big trees. We just missed lunch, but there should be some food left. When they came closer, Maggie realized that everything about the house was a little scaled up. The windows were just a foot higher up than usual, the door was bigger, the steps up the porch was just a little too high to easily walk up. It all gave her the distinct feeling of being smaller than usual. Other Maggie opened the door and walked in, pulling her acutely self-conscious Maggie along. Inside was a kitchen with the same oversized tables and chairs. There was a giant of a woman putting plates and glasses in the sink. She must have been almost 7 feet tall and looked like she was in her early 50s. She had that air about her that grandmothers do, even though she was a little young for it. Hey Mom, look who finally came to join us, other Maggie said. She turned to Maggie and whispered, her real name's Eliza, but she likes it when we call her Mom. Maggie. Eliza exclaimed and came over to give Maggie a hug. We've been waiting for so long. Let me have a look at you. Maggie unsuccessfully tried to cover up her bare chest and the diapers. No, that simply won't do. Come with me, dear. Eliza took Maggie's hand and led her out of the kitchen and down the hall to a bathroom. You hop up here, she said and patted what looked like a piece of the kitchen counter. Maggie realized that it was a giant changing table and just stood there in front of it, dumbstruck. Oh, come on now. You're a bit too big for me to lift you. Maggie looked around and saw a stool next to the changing table. She used it to clamber up onto the table and sat there with her feet dangling over the edge. Lie back, dear, Eliza said as she grabbed Maggie's legs and slid her further back. Maggie lay back on the smooth, warm surface. Are you still dry? She asked and unceremoniously slipped a couple of fingers inside Maggie's diaper. Maggie jumped. Hey, she blurted out. Of course I am. Eliza pulled the granny panties and towel diaper off Maggie in one quick yank, leaving her naked and desperately trying to cover up. Oh, come now. It's nothing I haven't seen 100 times before, she said. Now lift your butt. Without thinking, Maggie did as she was told and Eliza slid a diaper under butt. She quickly pulled it up between her legs and taped the whole thing in place. The whole operation took only seconds. She helped Maggie sit up and Maggie looked down at the teddy bear print. This is so weird. She reached down to touch it, somehow doubting that any of this was real. The plastic backing rustled softly when she did. Now, let's see if this doesn't fit you. Eliza held up a light blue summer dress. She slipped it over Maggie's head and helped her with the sleeves before helping her down from the changing table. Now you go outside and play with the others. Maggie walked back to the kitchen and out onto the porch, wondering what Eliza had meant by the others. But once she set foot outside, she heard excited voices from the other side of the house. She tiptoed to the corner and peeked around it. By the pond she could see 4 children playing. No, not children. They were adults dressed as children. Then it struck her, so was she. Maggie crept closer, ducking behind bushes until she was close enough to hear what they were talking about. It seemed the 3 of them, 2 girls and a boy, were having an argument about some kind of race in the brook that fed the pond. Eventually, they decided that the only way to settle it was another race. They picked up their crude wooden boats and ran upstream. I can see you, you know. Maggie froze. Oh, come on. That blue dress isn't exactly camouflage. Feeling like she had been caught trespassing, Maggie slowly emerged from behind her bush to see who had spoken. It was another boy. No, not boy, man. He was maybe in his late 20s, average height, a little chubby, with a deep tan and mop of curly brown hair. All in all not entirely unattractive, Maggie thought. He was sitting on a stone with his knees pulled up and his arms around them. Hi. Hi, I'm Tommy. Maggie. So, you're gonna want to have a seat for today's grand final of the race, Tommy said wearily. I think the score is like 1,000 points to Maria and 1,000 points to Jacob. So they're tied. Maggie sat down on the stone next to Tommy. I have no idea, I've lost count. But they should have time to finish before the rain starts. What do you mean? See that cloud over there? Tommy pointed towards the mountains in the distance. The one that sort of looks like a fish. Yeah. When it's on the other side of that mountaintop, it'll start to rain. How do you know that? Maggie looked at Tommy. He sighed. That's how it is every day. It'll start to rain and we go inside to play. It'll stop halfway through dinner. What do you mean every day? Every day is the same here. I've tried to figure out the routine, but this place gets inside your head. Makes you forget numbers and letters and dash. Who are you? A voice interrupted from behind them. Maggie turned around to see one of the two girls that had run off earlier. Maggie was a little thrown by the childish appearance of the young woman. While she might be around 20, she was wearing a pink dress so short her diaper peeked out below the hem. She had mussed up, blonde hair and a couple of dirty smudges on her cheeks and forehead. "Charlotte, this is Maggie," Tommy said. "Maggie, Charlotte." "Like the spider," she lisped. "She's been here a while," Tommy whispered. "Like I said, this place gets inside your head. Will you be my friend?" Charlotte looked up at Maggie with a wide-eyed, innocent expression. Sure," Maggie answered. "Yay." Charlotte shouted and threw her arms around Maggie to give her a hug. The unrestrained enthusiasm surprised Maggie, but she returned the hug, rubbing Charlotte's back. "Does this mean you'll stop bugging me now?" a voice asked snidely. When Maggie looked to see who had spoken, she saw a girl with olive skin and long black hair. She was wearing overalls and a red t-shirt and was carrying a wooden boat. "I guess you must be Maria," Maggie said. "I'm Maggie." Oh, look at you talking all fancy," Maria replied and rolled her eyes. "Don't listen to her, Maggie. She's just being a meanie," Charlotte said, frowning at Maria. She grabbed Maggie's hand and pulled her towards the garden. "Come on, I want to show you something." Charlotte dragged Maggie around the entire garden, showing her the apple tree and the patch of strawberry plants. She was just about to lead Maggie back to the pond when the first raindrops began to fall. Maggie glanced towards the mountains and just like Tommy had said, the fish-shaped cloud was just past the top of it. Maggie followed a squealing Charlotte back to the house. She darted from tree to tree in an attempt to stay dry in the steadily increasing downpour. Charlotte, on the other hand, danced along the path and jumped in a couple of the small puddles that had formed by the time they reached the porch. When they reached the kitchen, Maria and Jacob were sitting by the kitchen table coloring. Jacob was concentrating with his tongue out. Tommy was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Tommy?" Maggie asked. Maria gave her a quick look before she returned to her coloring book. "Mama's changing him." Charlotte had already climbed onto one of the oversized chairs and started hoarding the blue and green crayons, but Maggie didn't feel like coloring. So she decided to explore the house instead. She found a large living room on the ground floor and bedrooms and an additional bathroom on the first floor. When she made her way up the steep staircase to the attic, however, she found something odd. Somebody had tied some string between the backs of two chairs and put a blanket over it, creating a small tent. Well, small compared to the chairs, it was more than big enough for Maggie. The tent itself wasn't really all that strange, but inside she found a shoebox filled with papers. Leafing through them, Maggie saw mathematical equations and calculations far more advanced than what she understood, but the closer she came to the top of the stack, the simpler the maths became. Eventually, the numbers were replaced by unidentifiable squiggles and then there were drawings of flowers. Bluebells to be precise. Sometimes a single flower, other times whole fields of them. "Do you like them?" Maggie almost jumped out of her skin. Charlotte was kneeling in the opening to the tent. She crawled in and sat down next to Maggie, taking the stack of papers from her. "You did that?" Charlotte nodded. "I wasn't very good at first, but Mama said that if I practiced I would get better. And I did, see." She picked up a new drawing from the floor outside the tent and held it up for Maggie. It was a picture of two stick figures in a green field dotted with blue flowers. One was wearing a pink dress and the other a blue one. "I made it for you," Charlotte said. Thanks. "Come on, Mama said it's dinner time." Charlotte crawled out of the tent, giving Maggie a perfect view of her soiled diaper as she did. The two girls joined Tommy and Jacob in putting away the crayons and coloring books. They were almost done when Eliza and Maria came back from the downstairs bathroom. "Okay, anybody else need a change before dinner?" Eliza asked matter-of-factly. Charlotte looked away and scraped her foot on the floor. "Me," she said quietly. Charlotte made us stinky. Charlotte made us stinky. Maria began singing. Maggie could see that it upset Charlotte, who looked like she was about to burst out in tears. For some reason she felt oddly protective of her. Quit picking on her. Yeah, Tommy chimed in. Stop being a meanie. Maria. Eliza said sternly. Maria stopped immediately. Sorry, she mumbled, not sounding very sincere. Charlotte, however, didn't notice and went off with Eliza. Maggie sat down next to Tommy. So you're all wearing diapers? She asked quietly. Yeah. That's the first thing to go. Then it's numbers and letters like I told you. And finally you don't even remember anything from before. He nodded slightly towards Maria and Jacob. That doesn't sound so bad. I mean, apart from the diapers, this place doesn't sound all that bad. Are you kidding? It's the same day over and over and over. The rain starts at the same time every day. He pointed out the window. And by the time Mom puts the rest of the food back on the stove, it'll stop raining. Then just after sunset it'll get kinda windy. Tomorrow morning, just after breakfast, a big fish is going to jump in the pond, and so on and so on. Every day is the same, and every day you feel a little of yourself slip away. How long have you been here? Shush, Tommy said as Eliza and Charlotte returned. She doesn't like us talking about that. Charlotte sat down next to Maggie. Her face was cleaned up and her hair was in pigtails. Eliza looked at Maggie. How about you, dear? Are you sure you don't need a change? Maggie nodded. Okay then, Eliza said and began putting plates on the table. During dinner, Eliza had the children talk about what they had done that day. The stew was tasty, but a little bland. After they were done, Eliza rose to put the big pot back on the stove. Tommy gave Maggie a nudge and glanced towards the window. Outside, the rain had stopped and clouds had parted to show a rosy sky. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. After dinner, Tommy, Charlotte and Maggie retreated to the attic. Charlotte lay on the floor, drawing, while Tommy and Maggie sat in the tent. Okay, Maggie said, so the days really are repeating themselves. Millimeter HM. And you keep forgetting your old life, little by little. Tommy nodded. Well, how quickly does it happen? I'm guessing you've been here the shortest. Actually, Jacob came after me. I think you lose yourself more quickly if you don't resist, and he just went along with it from day one. Almost like he was running away from something.